can you give us your analysis of conditions for regime change on the ground inside Iran, please?
Yes, certainly. We contend that the regime in Tehran is on the brink of collapse, both internally and externally, as my colleague Sina just mentioned. Years of economic mismanagement and corruption, coupled with the severe effects of international sanctions, have driven the economy to the brink of collapse. Soaring inflation, high unemployment, and worsening living standards have created a population that is deeply frustrated with the regime. And this economic turmoil is compounded by the socio-political repressions as the regime continues and has always used censorship, arbitrary arrests, brutal crackdowns, things of that nature to suppress the dissent. And these pressures have ignited widespread and irreversible public anger, resulting in large-scale protests, nationwide uprisings that essentially challenged the legitimacy of the government. And at the heart of this unrest lies the rejection, a total and full rejection of the system of what the Iranian government calls the Velayat Faqih, which is the guardianship of the Ayatollah, or in other words, the centralized or absolute power of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. The Iranian people have increasingly demanded a secular government, signaling a profound delegitimization of the regime's authority. Since 2017, Iran has witnessed a series of significant nationwide uprisings, and the most significant uprising occurred between September 2022 and early 2023, following the death that shook the world of Mahsa Amini. Our research revealed essentially three important facts. The first is, despite the severe crackdowns and attempts to suppress dissent through executions and arrests, mass mobilization continues to grow in volume and intensity. And the second is the persistence and breadth of these uprisings suggests that the regime's repressive methods are increasingly ineffective, with each protest amplifying calls for systemic change and the rejection of the theocratic government. And the third point is the Iranian people's resilience has demonstrated that even the harshest repression cannot fully suppress their aspirations for freedom and justice. So the march continues. We also declared that there are four internal conditions at play that in Iran that tells us that the regime change is now not really a question of when, which is really now a question of when and not if. And they are, the first, a collapsing economy, as I just spoke about, high inflation, unemployment, corruption. The second is the delegitimization of the leadership, nationwide protests, massive election boycotts. And then, of course, there's also this issue of the looming succession crisis of Ali Khamenei, who is aging and not in very good health. The death is imminent. And then, of course, mass mobilization, women, youth, minorities continuously leading large-scale uprisings. And then finally, the organized resistance. And there is an organized resistance in Iran that offers an alternative with a clear governance plan for transition of power to the people after the fall of the government. So, as far as external setbacks, that is conducive for regime change in Iran. So, these are external things that have influenced what we see as the downfall of the government. The first and foremost is the loss of the strategic allies. And of course, the recent events, the fall of Assad in Syria, has really, these are logistical hubs that the Iranian regime uses, like Hezbollah and Hamas, have been severely weakened. The elimination of key leaders, Hassan Nasrallah, was huge. And of course, the death of Ebrahim Raisi. And then next is, of course, the proxy network coordination. So the difficulty in maintaining cohesion and effectiveness without the leadership of these proxy groups, with key regional allies, and leadership figures, as I just mentioned, this really strains the resources that the IRGC must compensate for because they're, again, as I said, the proxy networks have been terribly weakened. And then, of course, domestic repercussions, reduced regional influence, undermining Tehran's narrative of strength, which emboldens the opposition forces within the country. And of course, the operational capacity, where basically severely hampered abilities to project power and carry on Tehran's regional ambitions, as is the usual narrative of the government. So, together, these developments signal a really profound shift in the regional dynamics, creating an unprecedented opportunity for the people of Iran and the entire region. For the international community, particularly the United States and its allies, these events represent a critical opening to capitalize on Tehran's vulnerabilities and to support meaningful, lasting change in the region.
Anna, both you and Sina mentioned the OIAC report, and I just want to read one line from it here, which encapsulates what you have both said. And this is in the executive summary, quote, "This unique convergence of factors, internal unrest, regional isolation, and leadership instability, has pushed the regime to its dying breath," end quote. So let's talk about that. You mentioned briefly, Anna, the next steps for who takes over in the aftermath of regime change. Can you expand a little bit on what is day one? What does day one look like after the current regime?
So before I would be happy to answer that question. Before we get to that, I do want to say that we will be the paper that you just read. We will be releasing this paper to the public within a few days. It will be posted on the website www.oiac.org. And of course, if the members of the media and those people in attendance right now are interested to get a copy, please definitely send us an email with at info at oiac.org. We'd be happy to get a copy to you. Um, so essentially your question, so let me start, by sharing with you the criteria that we use in our paper to determine what Iran would change into who is, this viable alternative. We call for a U.S. policy that seeks to support an alternative to the regime in Tehran and aligns with the call for a non-nuclear secular republic in Iran. And these alternatives should include, of course, a clearly articulated vision for the future of Iran, a proven track record of effective global communication, significant engagement with international policymakers, and the ability to mobilize widespread support among the Iranian diaspora, a demonstrated capability in building strong diplomatic allies and fostering bipartisan support in influential forums in the US Congress and, of course, European parliaments, active participation in international platforms spotlighting Tehran's human rights violations and nuclear ambitions to shape global policy, and effective leadership, certainly capable of presenting a credible and inclusive vision that resonates with international democratic values and mobilizes support for regime change in Iran. Um, Advocacy for global accountability through international sanctions and investigations into the regime's oppressive actions, ensuring a commitment to justice and human rights. And so, conclusively, if we think about all of those things, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, stands out as truly the sole organization that is fully capable of meeting the outlined criteria for a viable alternative to the regime in Tehran. And this group's approach is both comprehensive and meticulously structured, showing a deep strategic understanding of both domestic and international political landscapes. Mariam Rajavi's 10-point plan emphasizes equality and justice, resonating with democratic values that appeal to a wide audience, both within Iran and internationally. And this inclusivity ensures that the vision for the future of Iran is one that encompasses the hopes and rights of every citizen living in the country. The successive waves of protest and uprising since the 2017, which I just spoke to you about, are neither accidental nor are they spontaneous. They're really a culmination of decades of resistance and careful organization within the country. And these movements have not arisen, in a vacuum, but rather within the context of sustained and coordinated resistance efforts led by the parliament in exile, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, as I mentioned, the NCRI, and the on the ground, of course, in coordination with the on the ground networks of resistance units, which of course include People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, the MEK. And so together in tandem, these forces represent the most persistent presence organized an effective opposition to the regime, playing a pivotal role in shaping, sustaining, and amplifying the protests that challenge the theocratic government. So the NCRI essentially serves as the political and organizational backbone of the resistance, which presents a clear and credible vision for a secular democratic Iran. And this vision is articulated through its delineated 10-point plan. And that 10-point plan calls for many things, but amongst the most important, gender equality, human rights, secular governments, and the abolition of the Velayat Fari, or the supreme leader, centralized power in the supreme leader system. Um, I just want to address something else also, that there is this false narrative out there that the NCRI and MEK don't have popular support inside Iran. And to be clear, when we talk about combating a dictatorship such as we have in Iran, this Iranian regime has maintained power for several decades at this point. And the only way to really gauge the popularity of the real opposition that exists in Iran is unfortunately through the harrowing indicators such as number one, the number of political prisoners who are aligned with the opposition. Number two, the number of executions inflicted on members of the opposition. Number three, the number of terrorist attacks and assassinations that target specifically the opposition. And then the frequency of the cyber attacks being the target of influence operations and demonization campaigns. And when you do the math and you look at the reality and the facts that are on the ground, the numbers are in favor of the NCRI and the MEK and the resistance units inside Iran. Right now, Mark, as we speak, there are 60 political prisoners that are facing executions in Iran. And in 1988 alone, just in that 1 year, actually in the span of the summer, 3 months, there was a massacre of 30,000 political prisoners. And this is where we can really make the distinction between an opposition with real roots and reach within Iran versus those that are hype or manufactured. And in this paper, we argue that the NCRA represents the only viable alternative. And you might wonder why. And the reason is that they are the only organization that has thrived across multiple generations, consistently championing the cause for a democratic Iran. They are the sole group that has maintained its integrity and persevered through periods of appeasement, wars, legal battles, challenges in both the US and European courts. And while I sincerely wish that other groups had survived these challenges, unfortunately, they have not. And therefore, this is not merely just a case of favoring one group over the other. This is a distinction and distinguishing, fact from fiction.
Anna, thanks